and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're clear hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Hey guys, welcome back to Tactical Tangents. Today we're going to talk about shooting. And we're not just talking about the actual firearms fundamentals. What we're talking about is if you go take a class somewhere, you learn how to shoot, they teach you the fundamentals, and usually there's a pretty steep climb until you hit that plateau where you've become, reasonably proficient. You've become kind of good or hit that novice level. Where you have to take that though, and I would say with the number of hours that most police officers get in the firearms academy, in the police academy, that probably gets you about there. You're still probably pretty novice, maybe a little bit more advanced because you're doing things like building clearing, you're doing things like active shooter drills, so there's a little bit more of a practical element to it, but as far as the actual firearms fundamentals, when you stop shooting and you haven't done it for a while, it's a perishable skill. You're going to forget a lot of those lessons learned beyond the police academy unless you do a lot of work on your own. And so what I'm talking about doing is taking the minimum standards that you're supposed to hit and making that consistent and then trying to improve that to the point that you're actually considered a good shooter. And my personal example of this is every year or two when we have a SWAT testing process at my department, we've got to shoot a handgun qualification. And the score that is required to get onto the team is a little bit higher than the minimum standards for the department. And most of the people that come into that shooting qualification stress themselves out and they'll, crap the bed on that qual. So what we want to do is shoot so consistent that not only those minimum standards for the bottom line, but minimum standards for SWAT and eventually even to shoot a perfect score seems not only attainable, but something that you're going to hit every single time. So that's what we're going to talk about today is trying to bridge
kind of reset your baseline. Would you say that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we're trying to go from beginner to good and consistent to competitive, maybe. And for the record, we are not competitive shooters. I'm not an expert pro shooter. I shoot as part of my job. Jim shoots for his job. I know Jim's done some competitive shooting a little bit, but
tiny bit.
But the point is, we're not here to try to sell you any snake oil that we are the world's best marksmen on the planet. But we do want to share a couple lessons that we've learned about going from basic beginner to good, and then on at least in the direction of great. And that's kind of what we're focusing on. So there's a couple things that we're going to talk about related to the fundamentals. And for me, what I want to discuss is what drills or ideas that I took to really hammer those fundamentals home. Everyone hears stuff about trigger control and sight alignment, sight picture, your stance, your grip, your breathing, that kind of stuff. And as soon as you start to add some pressure to it, a time element or, the stress of a qualification or the stress of a competition, that's when things start to fall apart. So what drills did we use to hammer some of that home for us? So that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit along the way here. Jim, what do you got?
Well, first off, I think nothing replaces just getting out there and shooting. And, different people have different ideas of how many rounds it takes to get good. I don't know, 5,000, 10,000, 100 million rounds. I don't know. Mike, do you have a thought on how many rounds you fired actually put out on the range before you started to be able to call yourself good?
No, I mean, I can tell you that I want to say in our basic academy, and these are split up into chunks, but it's something like 40 hours is the minimum number of hours required. I don't know how many rounds. And then I think our department exceeds that by quite a bit. We actually probably do more like 60, but that's spread about. And I don't know how many bullets it takes to get good, but what I can tell you is that one of the things that happened for me when I went from that baseline beginner, and I was trying to raise my baseline up to at least the SWAT qualification standards. And for me, what I wanted going into that was I wanted to be shooting perfect scores. I wanted that score to be perfect so that I knew if I had a bad day, there's no reason I shouldn't hit the SWAT minimum, right?
But you were going out to the range and making the gun go bang. And that's kind of my point is nothing beats that. You can read books about it. You can watch YouTube videos. You can think great thoughts about it, but nothing beats going to the range. It's a lot like getting better at any sport or any athletic thing is you got to go hit the gym.
Well, and that's, to interrupt you real quick, like you said, I was going out there and shooting, and the point that I was going to make was that it's more about going out there regularly. So, if I go out there every couple of weeks, and even if I only shoot 50 or 100 rounds, that frequency is more important than going out there once every 6 months and shooting 300 or 400. That's kind of.
I totally agree, and I don't like the term muscle memory, but it takes a lot of rounds to train your brain how to respond to recoil, how to focus your eyes, both on the target and on the sights, front sight, of course, and to make the trigger squeeze on any given weapon a known quantity, so you know exactly where that trigger is going to break. And that memory is perishable, just like you're saying. The more often you go, the better you're going to get, and nothing beats getting out to the range. You just got to do it. Got to hit the gym.
Yep. The muscle memory thing is interesting. There's a book, and I'm going to go back to this a little bit later, but there's a couple books that talk about talent. One is called Talent is Overrated. The other one is called The Talent Code. And one of the area that these guys, and they're two different authors, they're very similar, but the Talent Code focuses a little bit more on like coaching and teaching talent, identifying talent, whereas Talent is Overrated talks a little bit more about attaining talent. And they talk about this muscle memory idea or concept in a little bit different way. But one of the things that they've talked about is the neurons that fire when you practice a skill. And it could be, in these books, they talk a lot about like famous musicians, they talk about sports players. But when those neurons fire, if you fire them enough times with enough frequency, there's a protein that actually wraps around those neurons and insulates those signals a little bit. So the muscle memory thing, that's kind of what you're talking about, is trying to speed up that process.
Yeah, and I don't know the organic chemistry of it. What I do know is that beginners, when they get stressed out, shoot worse. And the more you get out there and the more you shoot, the more you raise your baseline. At some point, that stress makes you shoot better. And that's where you're trying to get, right?
Yeah.
And one of the secrets is the fundamentals. Whatever you've learned in terms of basic shooting, sight alignment, breathing control, grip, stance, that never goes away. It only gets more important as you go. And you're going to find yourself going back to them over and over as you get better. So every time you go out to the range, kind of consciously work your way through, okay, what am I doing with my breathing right now? What am I doing with my trigger right now? What am I doing with my sights? Which sight am I focusing on and why? And how am I gripping it? Be thoughtful about those fundamentals. And I grew up with the mnemonic raise, relax, aim, relax, aim, inhale, squeeze. Some of my better instructors have said raid, relax, aim, inhale, depress, because they want you to be very conscious of how you're depressing the trigger. Whatever you do, roll yourself through that as you're doing your drills. And I think that's going to make you a better shooter.
Yeah, and you talked about how better shooters sometimes under stress actually shoot better. And I think one of the things that I've found along the way is there's a lot of this that's easy to overthink it. So if you're trying to tell yourself, use that mnemonic, RAID, R-A, and go through it step by step, as opposed to just, presenting the gun and doing it, you're kind of on autopilot a little bit. Once you've done it enough times, that process...
Your 10 millionth time, that's automatic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it has to be your 10 millionth time, not your 100th time.
Yep, and I think the fundamentals, the way that this stuff gets neglected is because it's kind of boring. You go through some initial training, you go to a class and you get taught the basics, you could pass a qualification, and then you're good. And then you think you're good on the fundamentals, and now you just want to go do the high-speed stuff. You want to run and gun, you want to, pling steel, you want to, shoot on the move, do all this high-speed stuff. Yeah, show off. and maybe even start doing stuff on a timer. And what you're neglecting by doing that is, your fundamentals might be, here. If you take some time, though, on your shooting sessions every once in a while and actually improve on those individual things, all that high-speed stuff, you're going to be able to do even better. So maybe you can get away with it with whatever you're at, but you might be able to improve that and take it to the next level if you just go back to the basics from time to time and remind yourself, okay, let's just make sure that my trigger control is good. Let's check on my grip. Let's check on this, check on that. And like you said, it's got to be a deliberate thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the big themes that we're talking about here is disciplined practice. Going in thoughtfully with your practice. And one of the big things on that, I think, is having someone coach you. You need somebody, hopefully at minimum, just a better shooter than you, with you, calling you out on your mistakes. Having a buddy, having a coach. And it's just like any other sport skill, having someone else watch you and call you out, I think it makes a big difference.
I got a story about having people coach you, and like you said, you want it to be someone that knows what they're doing, that's better than you. When I was in the academy, I hit when we started shooting, I was shooting pretty well, pretty consistent, and somewhere along the line, we started shooting a little bit faster, and I started running some problems, and the instructor that was in the academy usually have a pretty high instructor-student ratio. It's maybe not quite 1-to-1, but it's like maybe 1-to-2, something like that. And this guy was behind me, and he was always on his cell phone. He's texting or Facebook or whatever it was he was up to. I have no idea, but he would keep telling me that you're shooting to the left. It's your grip. You're not. You have to fix your grip. Like, you need to grip harder, grip harder, grip harder. You're shooting left. It's because of your grip. And what I found myself doing was wrenching down on my grip. And I assumed that I listened to him. That's okay. That's what I'm doing wrong. I got to grip harder, and it was a disaster. It just got worse, because what ended up being the case was my grip was fine. It wasn't really about that. It actually had more to do with my trigger control and using the 3 fingers below my trigger finger. Isolating just my trigger finger. It wasn't so much that I was not gripping hard enough with my left hand. It was the trigger control and the rest of my hand on my right hand. Like, that I shoot right-handed.
So good coaching matters.
Yeah. And the only way that I figured that out is because one of the other instructors there, one of the good ones, happened to, have people out on the weekend down at the range. If they were, as quals were getting closer, if you were worried that you weren't going to make it, he would meet us out there on his own time and try to coach us. And he cared about it. He liked coaching and teaching and stuff. So he would do that for us for free. And it wasn't until I went down there and got with him that we got an accurate diagnosis of the problem. And I think the takeaway from that is you have to isolate the variables. If they're telling you that your grip is the problem, or if you think that your grip is the problem, make sure that it can't possibly be something else, right? Because having a good coach would eliminate a lot of the guesswork on your part, but you have to make sure that you're getting it right.
Well, one thing that just hit me, I was thinking about how often when you messed up was it the gun?
Never.
Is it ever the gun?
Yeah. Well, so here.
Except this one time.
Well, I don't know. I don't. Okay, so let me continue with this story a little bit. The good coach, right? The good instructor that I had that took me out to the range. At some point, I was getting really frustrated because I felt like everything I was doing wasn't fixing my problems, right? And this was, like I said, this was when I first started. And I hit this point of diminishing returns, nothing's getting better, and he looked at my gun, and he goes, "I'll be right back," and he walked away with it, and he came back, and he said. Your front sight was crooked. I fixed it. Now, this is
magic oil on it.
Well, so this is the mental. This is the mind. The mind game here. I don't know that if it was. I don't know if it was actually off. I don't know if he actually adjusted it. It could have been. So maybe it was an equipment failure. For all I know, the sight was messed up, but I started shooting fine. And so there's a good possibility that he was just psyching me out and trying to just get my head out of the rut, and to start focusing and say, okay, my problem should be fixed now and I should be good. It gives me kind of that confidence. So other than that time, which I don't really know, I don't know that there's any, whether other times that it's been the gun or not.
I think that's a great point. I would go further. I would say until you are for sure a good shooter, don't screw with your gun. I think one of the biggest mistakes new shooters make is they, one, blame the gun, and two, make modifications to their gun without knowing what they're doing. And my rule on making changes to my gun is that I have to be 100% sure that I know better than the engineers who designed it what I want that gun to do.
Yeah, and when we talked about the people, ideas, and hardware thing in our last episode, that was something that we touched on just briefly. Was the shooter is more important than the gun, right? The human element and the ideas behind it. These are the things that we want to put time and thought into. So, for example, if I'm going to use muscle memory, do I always want my mags to be in the same place, or how do I want to fix my malfunctions and stuff like that? I didn't mess with anything on my gun until I was shooting a perfect score. I didn't change. I took the gun as it was given to me. I didn't change the sights. I didn't mess with the trigger. I didn't do anything to it. Now, since then, I put different sights on it. I like the Trijicon HDs. I polished up the trigger a little bit just to smooth it out. I put a magwell on it and a beaver tail on it. So it's got some inputs now, but I wouldn't go near that stuff until I was shooting a perfect score.
Yep, and a lot of that is just you don't want to change the variables if you can help it.
Exactly.
So one thing that I'm big on is dry fire, and Mike and I are both real big on visualization and rehearsal, and this is the essence of it. If you're going to do dry fire, obviously you got to make sure your gun's empty and check again and then check again, because a lot of people put holes in their walls and in their TVs and in their computers doing dry fire that wasn't dry. And then you have to practice shooting it 45 million times. And it goes back to that muscle memory thing, right? So some people are going to tell you that that's bad for the gun. That dry fire is bad for the gun. I think that's a myth. Any modern gun should be able to handle dry fire, period. And if you're buying a gun that can't handle it, you need a new gun. And if you break a part, replace the part. But it's worth whatever wear and tear you put on the gun to become a better shooter.
Yeah, all of our instructors told us straight up that we needed to go home and dry fire for so much a night. And again, it's not that you dry fire for 6 hours on over a weekend every 6 months. It's just picking up a gun, dry firing for 5 or 10 minutes, a couple times a week or something like that will go a long way. And Jim gives me a hard time about nerding out about the neurons and the insulation thing, but it's reading stuff like that gives me the buy-in that, hey, if I'm firing these neurons that much and I'm making those signals, going from my brain through my spine down to my hands, and those are crystal clear, I'm programming myself for success. That and just like we said earlier with the fundamentals, the deep dark secret about dry firing is that we all talk about how important it is. And I think a lot of people don't really do it. Like, they say that they do it, they say that it's important, and then
it's like going to the gym.
Yeah,
and they'll take a selfie of themselves, but yeah,
yeah, right. And but I can tell you from personal experience, there is and we'll tell the story about how I had a forced break from the SWAT team for a little while in another episode someday. But I had some time away, we'll call it, from the team for a little bit, and I didn't get to shoot that much. And I dry fired a lot. And when I got back on the horse, back on the team, I was still shooting well because I was dry firing. It kept that proficiency kind of up to speed. And like Jim said, that visualization and rehearsal and doing it physically, it helps.
Oh, yeah. And for our civilian guys, bullets are expensive, and I know that. Mike and I both shoot off duty. And sometimes they're freaking impossible to find. If the political situation goes crazy, and it has a couple times in the last 10 years where you just can't buy bullets, that's what keeps you current. Another thing that I started doing is I started shooting pellet guns during that time. It was just something to keep my brain focused on those fundamentals, trigger break and front sight and all that. And it helped. So I think it helped a lot.
Yeah, I bought one of those CERT pistols.
For What's a cert pistol?
Yeah. So it's a dry fire gun. It's a cert. It stands for something. I don't know what it stands for, but it's SIRT. If you go Google it, you could find it. The company that makes them is called Next Level Training, and it's basically, and they make them in a couple different models, but mine is basically the weight and feel of a Glock, and it's got a trigger on it. You can adjust. They're expensive. Bottom line up front, I'm here to tell you, they cost as much as a real gun. I got mine on eBay for a little bit cheaper, but it was still like $300. But if you think about, I mean, I pick up that it's sitting next to me, and I pick that thing up all the time. Dry fire for a few minutes with it. I don't have to cycle the slide every time I pull the trigger, so I can do it quickly and squeeze in a couple minutes before work every day. And it's made a huge difference. And if I were to try to put a number on, the value of this cert gun, I think easily it has outweighed the cost of 300 bullets. $300 worth of bullets if I was to spend it on the cert pistol instead. There's a couple
And
things.
just to be clear, we're not getting paid to tell you that.
No, this is just
that's our personal experience.
That's what I did when I was off the team for a while. For real, I bought one of these cert guns, and I still use it all the time. It keeps me fresh. But there's some pitfalls. Like Jim said earlier, nothing's going to replace going out to the range and actually shooting the gun. You definitely got to do that. But the cert pistol, there's some videos online on their website where they compare the amount of time between shots if you're pulling the trigger on the cert gun versus if you were, shooting live fire with recoil, and it's like almost the same. The recoil is almost negligible. How much time you spend off target. The other thing, and again, you have to know going into it that the cert isn't the end all. It's just a component of a bigger training plan. But it's really easy. It has a laser indicator, and so if you're not careful, you're going to start watching that laser instead of staying focused on your front sight. And if you do that, you're going to notice it in your shooting, because what's going to happen is right as the shot's about to break, you're going to lose focus on that front sight, and that's the crucial time that you need to keep it there. So you can't chase the laser. If you're pulling the trigger on that thing and you're moving the gun a lot, the laser will make kind of like a dash. You want dots, not dashes. And you still need to put the time crunch on it. We talked about this earlier. You start adding time pressure, that's when things start to fall apart. And where I've noticed myself catching, if I'm going to jerk the trigger, is if I'm coming out of the holster and trying to get that first round off in a big hurry. That's when I jerk the trigger. And so if I practice that with the cert gun, I'm a lot less likely to do that when I actually go to the range or in real life.
Speaking of going to the range, when you do go to the range, I think you need to go with a training plan. I think going to the range, again, with the analogy, it's just like going to the gym. You can go to the gym and you can screw around on whatever it is that looks interesting. You can just do bicep curls, and you can just take selfies of yourself in the mirror doing bicep curls, but you're probably not going to get any stronger. You have to go in with a routine, and honestly, it doesn't even matter which routine you pick. It's like picking a diet, and the important part is that you're on a diet, right? Run yourself through a couple of drills, practice the stuff that's hard, practice the stuff that's uncomfortable.
Yeah. My training plan, and I know we talked about the fundamentals, and what I've found is that there's certain parts of the fundamentals that you just kind of have a light bulb one day and you start to get it. And then there's other things that you have to wait and things start to like pile on top of each other. And there's like some aggregate growth that happens. And they compound into your shooting skill, and it's a more gradual thing. And what happened with me and these fundamentals, when I go to the range, first of all, let me break this into two parts. First of all, when I go to the range, each session that I do, I always try to do certain things, and I'm going to try to isolate those fundamentals. So I'm always going to do some like dot drills where I have a small dot on the paper, and I'm up fairly close, 5 yards or something like that, and I'm trying to put single bullets in the same hole essentially, and make one big hole in the paper. Real precision drills, right? And then I'm always going to go out to distance and also do some accurate, slow, accurate, precise fire, because any of your errors will get amplified at distance, right? So if I'm up close and I'm doing a precision drill, usually what that helps me dial in is my trigger control. Because if I move the trigger at all, then it's not going to be in the same hole. If I go out to distance and assuming that my trigger control's on point, usually where I see problems, it has something to do with my grip. And so I'm always going to shoot at distance. I'm always going to shoot precise shots up close, and then I'm always going to shoot.
You got to grip it real hard.
Yeah, exactly. Just
real hard.
Just like my crappy coach taught me that one time. And you do, and you're right, and that, or he's right to a degree that grip is a factor. It just wasn't in this particular instance. But I'm always going to try to look at those things and isolate those fundamentals. But the other part of it is when I'm trying to figure out what fundamental that I'm lacking in, it's difficult to isolate those sometimes. So the one that our firearms instructors use, and hopefully a lot of you guys have heard about this, but you get those dummy rounds like the snap caps and you put them in your mag. And we did it in the academy, and then we never did it again. So I went on eBay or Amazon or something, and I bought some of those. And every once in a while, I just throw a couple of those in my mag somewhere, maybe just in one mag. If I load 3 or 4 mags up, I'll have one that's tricked out, and I won't know which one it is. And it's the honesty check. When you get to one of those dummy rounds and you yank the trigger, okay, I caught it. I caught myself. The other thing that I'll do is I talked about the dot drill. If I'm trying to speed that up a little bit, I'll use like a roll of masking tape. And I'll use the inside of the roll, so it's like a 2 or 3 inch circle. And so now I can take still a fairly precise, accurate shot, and I can start to add a little bit of speed to it, and that'll help identify some of those shortfalls in the fundamentals for me. What other? You do anything to work on your fundamentals? Training plan stuff is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, for me, for training plan, I generally go out and do a warm up because I don't get out to the range as often as I want, and I go burn a magazine and try to put bullets through bullet holes, and then I'll do my military qualification course. So I'm doing it mostly at about 7 yards, 21 feet, and I'm doing 2 to the body, 1 to the head. Not because I love that drill, but because my employer loves that drill. So I do that because I'm at this point in my shooting career, shooting less than expert on an Air Force qual test should be embarrassing to me. So I don't want to embarrass myself when I get out there. And I then push the target back, I don't know, probably 25 yards, something like that, and go from there. I'll try to do a couple of rapid fire sessions where I'm trying to put a lot of rounds quickly and accurately through basically USPSA bullseyes, so body and head bullseyes, and I usually bring a buddy, and so at that point I start coaching, and I learn by teaching. It's one of the reasons I do this podcast. Yep. Is I get better by teaching, and I catch more of my own BS when I realize that I'm spewing it. So,
and I the same thing happens with me teaching. Speaking about the teaching thing, because I have to have a more thorough understanding of something to teach it, and conceptually that makes a big deal. And a good example of that is when I was working on my grip. And we talked about the coach that I had when I first started. One of our firearms instructors was hassling me about my grip, and became this big thing. My grip has been an issue for me, and it took a long time to figure that out. And I went to a bunch of different websites, watched a bunch of YouTube videos to try to figure my grip out. And the bottom line on the grip is that everyone's gun is going to fit in everyone's hands a little bit differently. And so what you're trying to do is get enough lateral pressure on the gun to compensate for any other movement. So, in my case, and what the good coach pointed out to me back in the day was when I pull my trigger with my trigger finger, the other 3 fingers underneath it tend to kind of move with it, right? And so on one hand, you want to try to isolate that movement. And on the other hand, literally with the other hand, you want to try to, if you are going to move those fingers, especially if you're pulling the gun out and shooting in a hurry, maybe you counter the movement with those fingers with your other hand so that it doesn't move the gun, right? Like it's equal on both sides. And it took me a long time to try to figure that out.
Yeah, it's hard for me to visualize what you're saying, and when I try to do it, I end up making like one of those cheesy gang signs, like blood.
So okay, let me tell you that's kind of conceptually what I'm talking about, having the equal lateral pressure on the sides of your gun. But
Yeah.
if I, let's say you're holding your gun in one hand, right? And your support hand, you're going to point your thumb towards the target, right? And then with your thumb pointed towards the target, you're going to wrap the gun, the hand that's holding the gun, with the fingers of your other hand, and your thumb is kind of like along the side of the frame. Well, as you've built that two-handed grip, if you look closely, for a lot of us, at least for me, there's a gap between the palms of your hand. And you want to try to close that gap and keep all the meat on the gun, as much meat as you can on the gun. So
meat on the gun, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So closing the gap between so when I build my two-handed grip, focusing on closing that gap is what helped me a lot. And what I found is that the best way to do that, I had to kind of rotate my hands a little bit. And this is obviously hard to describe in an audio, not video form, but like if I was to turn my hands folded into each other so that there's a little bit of one hand turns one direction, the other turns the opposite way, as I'm trying to force the palms of my hand together, that's kind of what helped me close it. So it's hard to visualize, but
and here's my take on that, is that if you're having to do too much uncomfortable or unnatural adjustment to what you're doing with your hands to get your finger to sit right on the trigger, which is really what you're trying to do, you need to go ahead and adjust the grips. A lot of modern guns, most current generation Glocks, Smith & Wessons, they have little attachments you can put on the back of the hand grip to make it bigger or smaller. Go ahead and play with those until on an empty gun, you're holding the gun in such a way that it feels natural and your trigger finger is resting, the middle of the meat of the tip of your finger is on that trigger. If you're punching your finger all the way through the trigger guard, or if you're having to reach to get to the trigger, you need to make an adjustment to the gun, or you need to get a different gun, one that fits your hand better.
Now, well, two things on that. The first is you talked about getting a different gun, and so I think that's huge. Now, if you work for an agency or you're in the military and you don't have a choice in that makes it difficult.
The M9 or the M9, but if you really want an M9, you can have that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my department actually recently, we used to be, everyone had a Glock, and they recently got a program to prove for certain people who have trouble with that grip to carry an M&P. And
interesting.
Yeah, and so, but the lesson, if you're going to go buy a gun, assuming that you have a choice in the matter, is you have to actually go out and hold the gun and find one that fits your hand. It's not just about like, oh, I want a Glock because Glocks are cool, or I swear by HD I have to, or XD I have to have an XD, or I have to have a Kimber 1911, or whatever it is that you're a fanatic about. There's a component there that is your individual. It's like having the right size shoes on. You have to make sure that you have something that'll fit your needs, and the different size handguards are part of that. But even with that, for some guns, it's not going to work. The other thing is, I think there's some controversy about your trigger finger and where on the trigger your finger should sit. I've heard different takes on that. Some have said they want their trigger in the crease of the first knuckle, and some have said that they use the pad of their finger. I
have been taught that you do different trigger holds for different scenarios. If you're trying to shoot fast, if you're in a fight in the phone booth, you hook it. You get that, just like you said, the crease of your finger on that trigger, because that's what's going to get you the quick rounds off.
Right.
And if you're trying to shoot precision, which that's what we practice to, you want the center of the meat of your tip of your finger.
Yeah. And I don't I mean, personally, I have a hard time switching it up. Like if I pull my gun from my holster, I want to be ready if I've got to take, if it's a hostage shot and I've got to take a precise headshot versus, if I've got the drop on someone and I'm just going to, let it burn. I'm probably not going to grip the gun differently. In my particular setup with my particular gun, I would have to completely redesign my grip to try to get enough finger behind, to get in the crease, the trigger in the crease of my finger. That would be difficult for me. I don't know what if there is a right answer there. I know I've talked to good shooters and they have differing opinions on it. It might be just a personal preference and a size, size of your hand thing.
Well, yeah, I think the size of your hand makes a big difference. I think that some of the techniques people use work for them. Like you look at it, how some championship shooter shoots. Uh, it works for them. Their build, their biomechanics, and if you do it, it might be so exaggerated because of the size of your frame or the size of your hands. Maybe you have little girl hands. Maybe you have big, meaty hands, and that affects how you hold the gun. It just does.
You and I have talked about this, but it's another example of using the C clamp on a carbine, on like an AR-15, and some guys can, and I happen to be one of those guys that the C clamp works well for. If you reach out, all the way extended out on the front of your forend. For some people that doesn't work right. It just depends
This is on a rifle for those not familiar.
Right. So there's some personal preference there, but again, with good coaching and the right people, the right information, you can kind of figure that out. So, so I want to talk. We've talked about some of the fundamental stuff and a couple drills. I want to give you an example that came up recently. A buddy of mine who's going through the academy. You guys are going to hear from him soon. Asked me about trying to speed up the first shot out of the holster. He has a goal in mind of trying to draw his gun and get the first accurate shot off in, less than 1.5 seconds or something like that. And I don't remember exactly that. I think that's his number, but he has some goal, right? And so I think he's shooting at 2-inch circles. It's not like dot torture, but it's, it's a 2-inch circle. So it's a fairly precise shot from probably like 3 or 5 yards. And he was looking for tips on how can he improve on that time. And so I want to go over kind of how I talked him through my thoughts on this. And then Jim, you could jump in and give me your ideas. But to me, there's two sides of that equation, right? You have the accuracy side and you have the speed side. So if I had no time limit whatsoever, can I draw and get that one round on the target? 1 round in a 2-inch circle, 100% of the time? Probably yes. So what I told him to do is to figure out what speed he can hit almost 100% in that 2-inch circle. That isn't his goal. If he's trying to speed it up, right? He wants 1.5 seconds. But maybe if he does like 3 seconds, can he do, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 times hit that target? Find a number that gives you an idea on that balance between speed and accuracy. And then you have to try to diagnose when you start cranking it up, what are the things that are going to be your issue? So you have a speed thing, which probably has something to do with his draw, the economy of motion of getting the gun out of the holster and on target. And then you have an accuracy thing, just the marksmanship part, which is as the time starts to increase, some of those fundamentals are going away. And so what I encouraged him to do was, like I said, the first thing is we're going to dial the speed down a little bit so that he can figure out where he can be accurate more often than not, a majority of the time.
And then and this is where having a coach makes a huge difference. Having someone standing behind you, calling out your errors, somebody with a shot timer, nothing beats that. And you can go to the range and go bang, bang, bang all day long and impress yourself until you have someone standing behind you being like, no, dude. Oh, and by the way, flagged your own kneecap as you drew the gun.
Right. So, and then my other suggestion to him was, okay, then once you figured out what time you could get that 2-inch circle and good accurate hits, now let's start messing with the size of the target, right? So if you're just talking about, maybe we use a full silhouette or like an IPSC target or, an 8-inch circle, like a paper plate, something like that. What speed can I shoot that large target out of the holster? And then if I can keep that speed consistent and start decreasing the size of the target. So you have to figure out what part of the problem you're having. So on one hand, and I'm a big fan of the slow-mo video. Like all the phones now have slow motion video. And we actually do it at training, where we'll take slow-mo video of ourselves drawing our gun or doing a reload. And
you set it to Last of the Mohicans music? You do, don't you? Or is it 300?
It's actually not any music.
Yeah,
Jim. It's just a slow-mo
Yeah.
video. But
Busted.
you're looking for economy of motion, right? Because you can, and again, you can do this at home where you're just going to work on your draw. And on the Facebook page, we actually posted a video a while back at a training day. One of the guys on my team, we had some visitors that were there, some VIPs that were shooting machine guns. We took them out to the range, and they're shooting fully auto MP5s and having a great time. And he's over there like off by himself, and he's a competitive shooter, and he's legit. In fact, we'll have him on here sometime to talk about shooting stuff, and you know who I'm talking about if he ever listens. Get up for it. But I have a video of him like standing off the side of the range, just working on his draw. And he's just taking his gun out of the holster. Repetition, right? Just like we talked about earlier. But you can work on that at home or anywhere. So if your goal is 2-inch circle, 5 yards, 1.5 seconds out of the holster, right? And you're trying to isolate, you're trying to improve that, you have to break that down into little parts. So first, let's work on the speed out of the holster, that component. Then let's work on the accuracy part and the fundamental, jerking the trigger. Maybe use the snap caps or the dummy rounds we talked about earlier. And then if you're talking about speed and economy of motion, make it a bigger target. You can shoot faster if you're not trying to be so pinpoint. And once you figure out which of those variables are weak, that's where you can identify how you can, because you get to that point where you're at 1.5 seconds and, or 2 seconds, you're trying to shave off tenths of a second. You're looking for something small, right? So you have to break it down into small pieces to find the part that you can control.
Yeah, I would also suggest never pass up a chance to go shoot a competition. Competition makes you better. And get out, do USPSA or 3-gun or IDPA. It doesn't even really matter. And there are some people who will debate that and say, well, that's not truly tactical. No one's shooting back at you. And that's true, but it's a hell of a lot better than just standing isosceles on a range and making the gun go bang. You've got a time pressure. You've got other people watching you. And everyone I know who competes gets better. And a lot of people I know who don't compete don't ever get better.
Yeah, I actually one of my mentors at work, who's now one of my supervisors, actually, back in the day, I asked him about what, and for the record, in addition to, he was a Marine. I think he fought in, it might have been, did he go to Desert Storm or something like that? I can't remember. But
Iwo Jima.
He's been in like 5 or 6 shootings, I think, as a police
That's a
officer. Yeah. And he's been on SWAT for a long time. But in all of the shootings, I asked him, were there any specific things that you have done that have made a big difference? And that was one that he told me was shooting competitions. Believe it or not, nothing simulates pressure and adrenaline better than pressure and adrenaline. I know a lot of people that do these drills where they'll have people do like 15 burpees and go run a lap and do some push-ups or something before they shoot, thinking that it's getting your heart rate up. And I think there's value to that, because I think there's just the physical fitness component is legit, but it does not simulate, there's research to support that. And I'll have to find a quote for that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I know that I've read somewhere.
On the internet.
Yeah, probably on the internet, which means I actually in a book. I just got to figure out which book. But somewhere I read that physical, your heart rate being elevated because of cardiovascular demand related to exercise is not the same thing as increased heart rate from a sympathetic nervous response, because what you miss is the hormone, the hormone or the adrenaline dump, right? You're missing that component. But yeah, so he said shooting competitively made a big difference, and the other one was simunitions, shooting with simunitions.
Yep. And having someone shoot at you and having a pain penalty where it sucks to get shot, I think that's huge.
Yeah. Well, and he's also, and the other big thing there is the decision-making component, which you can take basic marksmanship out of it altogether, making sure that you're shooting the right guy for the right reason and that you do it fast enough that, you can save your life or someone else's, is a whole other element to it. But what can we take from that? Even if we go paintballing or airsofting or something like that, there might be value there that if you don't have the means to go out and use simunitions, and for those not familiar, simunitions is just a really expensive paintball system. We could shoot real guns with them, and they're marking, paint cartridges, but they're pricey. And so, unfortunately, for at least at my department, most patrol personnel very rarely get to use them, and I wish they got to use them more. But maybe we go do a squad paintball match or something like that. I mean,
I'm a certified UTM instructor. UTM is a similar system to simunition. It's just two different brand names for the same basic idea. And UTM has most of the military contracts, and part of the military requirement in the contract was that there has to be a pain penalty. So when you get hit with one of these things, you freaking know you got hit.
Yeah. So anyway, that was his advice, and the competition thing. Like I said, I think the pressure and the adrenaline. I've wanted to get into competitions. I need to find the time. It's an excuse, but I do agree that there's value to it. So we talked about a little bit earlier. We talked about that book, Talent is Overrated. It's written by Jeff Colvin. There's another one called The Talent Code, which talks a lot about coaching. So if there's any firearms instructors that happen to listen to this, it might be worth checking out for your students. It talks about trying to pinpoint talent in other people. But the premise of both of those books has a lot to do with the fact that talent isn't something that you're necessarily just born with. It's not some innate gift. It's something that comes with time and experience. And in both of these books, they discuss kind of what I talked about earlier, and that is kind of the insulating property of firing those neurons and stuff. And they talk, their case studies are people like Mozart or Tiger Woods or, the Manning brothers in the NFL. They use these talented people and they start to dissect the things in their life that are likely to have contributed to their success. For example, Tiger Woods' father was a professional golfer. And so he was sitting in a high chair at however many years old, watching his dad practice his swing out in the garage or whatever. And as soon as he was old enough to play and hold one and walk around, he was probably swinging a golf club. So by the time that he got attention and became famous, you're talking about a guy that had, 10 plus years of experience. One of the takeaways from specifically Talent is Overrated was he talks about not just hours of practice, but the right kind of practice. And he calls it deliberate practice. The components of it are that you have to balance basically the amount of practice that you're doing with the quality of the practice. And he says that high quality practice has to have 4 things. There has to be immediate feedback, which is really easy to do for the most part in shooting sports because you can always go look at your target and see what you hit. So you have to have some kind of feedback and know if you're doing it right or wrong. Second is you have to have repetition, and the practice has to be mentally engaging and not just mindless repetition. It has to be something that you're not just doing over and over again, that you're actually applying some effort to those steps. And then the final thing is that it has to be outside of, or at least on the edges of your comfort zone. If you know exactly that you can shoot, this many rounds in this amount of time at this distance and this size target, you have to, if you want to get any better, you're going to have to work on the edges of where you're at. So that is Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin, and the Talent Code, I'll have to look up the author on that one. Both of those links will be in the show notes. And I got one more, and it's called The Art of Learning by Joshua Waitzkin. And that book, Joshua Waitzkin was an interesting guy. Is an interesting guy. He was a world-class chess player, and at some point as he got a little bit older, he needed kind of a break from chess, and he took up martial arts. And with some time, he became a world-class martial art competitor. So he talks about kind of how he learned, he figured out that the thing that he was good at was learning. And one of the concepts that he uses is math without numbers. And basically what it means is that a good mathematician can look at a problem and kind of understand intuitively what's going to happen with those, he doesn't know the answer yet. He hasn't crunched the numbers, but he knows kind of in general what's going to happen, how it's going to transform. And one of the things that he talks about is making smaller circles. And so where this where I applied this to firearms was looking at things like, so he describes how you have to like identify friction points and try to smooth those out, right? And so in firearms, when I learned how to draw a gun, day 3 of the academy or something, they started teaching us to practice drawing the gun, right? It was taught to us in 4 steps. It was like, you got to grab establish your grip, defeat the retention, clear leather, point the gun down range, build your grip, And so it was taught in kind of this 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. And when you're brand new, you're a beginner, you go through each of those steps, and in between, when you get 1 done, then you're thinking about 2. And then you get 2 done, you're thinking about 3. And so there's kind of some friction points. And so you have to break that down into smaller components and try to smooth the whole thing out. And we talked about using slow-mo video and stuff like that. But you want to try to find the points where you have to mentally pause to think about what to do next and smooth those things out so that you can build speed into it and get that flow. So that book is The Art of Learning by Joshua Whiteskin. And again, the link will be in the show notes. Jim?
I want you to have that picture in your head when you go to the range. Hey, am I just that guy doing bicep curls and selfies? Picture yourself going to the gym. If you have that in your head, you're going to get more out of your range time. Try to have someone coach you, videotape yourself if you can, put yourself under some time pressure, go in with a plan, and repetition is the mother of learning, repetition is the mother of learning, repetition is the mother of learning.
Yep. All right. That's all I got. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Give us feedback. Rate us on whatever app you're using. We
Tell
need
your friends.
What's up?
Tell your friends.
Yeah, share with your friends. Like and follow on Facebook. All that stuff. We need your support. We appreciate it. Thanks for listening.